I was just looking through all the Warner Brothers titles, and I noticed that they owned the Midway game titles. And I saw Rampage, and immediately it took me back to an arcade and playing that game.
There's a nostalgia factor to Rampage that kind of stamps a real golden era for arcade games, almost like a Pac-Man kind of type game.
I played the game and I recognized the game, but Duэйn apparently loved the game, like as a kid. Like this is the game he sought out.
I've spent many hours upon hours at a local pool hall in Hawaii. Oftentimes I would skip school and quarters after quarters into Rampage.
You know, when they brought up the game, they brought up Duэйn's passion for it, and then when I talked to Duэйn about what he wanted to do with his character, that's what kind of got us all launching down the road towards making this thing.
A little over 3 decades ago, I was working as a video game animator, game designer for Bally Midway. We did a lot of things in that game that nobody ever did before. You could play cooperatively with your friends, try to get as far as you can. You could beat each other up if you wanted to. You could join in at any time, so the game could literally play for 8 to 10 hours on end and never reach the end of the game. So for those reasons and the comedy, it sucked a lot of quarters.
When Rampage came along, it was one of the first games where you weren't really playing the hero. You weren't playing the guy in the helicopter, you were playing the giant monster, and you got to destroy the city.
When I was a kid, it was a fun video game that, whether it was on Nintendo or whether it was on the stand-up arcade game, it meant a lot to people.
I identified with George because I created him first, and then we needed little human pictures. So at the beginning of that very first arcade game, as the teletype comes up and you can see a little picture of a human, Lizzie was my wife and Ralph was Jeff Nauman, the programmer.
That game, which is basically Angry Birds for my childhood, it was so much fun to take control of those monsters and be able to attack a building and have it come down under your power. It was awesome.
It was more about what surprise are we gonna see next? What is behind that window? It's a cake, I eat the cake. It's a man in the bathtub, I eat the man. I punch it a third time, the shower head comes around and squirts me in the face. So the little teeny gags people kept playing for years.
Me and my generation spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars in quarters on that damn machine. So I'm happy to be here because I feel like this is a way that I'm actually making some of that money back that I spent on the 1986 Rampage arcade game. It's justice.
What I think that we borrow from the game is a tone, like a fun tone. When I looked at what it was offering in terms of the creative elements I thought I had to deliver on in the movie and the freedom it allowed me to do to go kind of develop the story, that's when I got really intrigued.
Nice. Nice take. One for fun. Great take.
You know, it's just so funny how sometimes things come full circle like this. Years later, heard from a producing partner, Beau Flynn, and he says, we have this idea. Have you ever heard of Rampage? I said, have I ever heard of Rampage? Dude, I love Rampage.
I've wanted to make a monster movie my entire career. I've been producing for a long time. Something as it's a young childhood dream. And then the idea of taking Dwayne Johnson, Brad Peyton, and going ahead and doing a giant, epic monster movie is something that is beyond thrilling.
Hey, come and get me, you ugly son of a bitch! At that time, it wasn't a fully fleshed out, really comprehensive, detailed storyline. It was monsters, and they are rampaging through the cities, and they're destroying shit.
I started to hear pitches from writers. Lots of writers came in with lots of different takes, including going as true to the game as possible, where it's actually humans mutating into these monsters. But then there was just this one take that stood out, and it was Ryan Engle.
It was like an opportunity to do a badass monster movie, to do a love letter to my favorite 1980s monster movies that I grew up with, Jaws, Jurassic Park. But then you have to kind of go, okay, well, how do I do a movie about these animals and tell a story that's emotional, that's action-oriented, and where the animals aren't the heroes?
Rampage as a movie was a lovely one to adapt because there was not a lot of story or mythology there. We had the ability to create it, and that's very unique.
They're here.
3 big, scary, badass creatures from the game. It was just sort of a jumping off point. There's a couple Easter eggs in the movie.
In our villain's office, you'll notice In the background, there is a stand-up Rampage game. I'd say that's Easter egg number one.
If you watch closely, you will see George pull someone out of a building and eat them. It's something that we did in the background because we didn't want to step on the big moment when he eats Claire later in the movie.
In the video game, there's a woman who wears a red dress.
The girl in the red dress is something that was critical, and it is a spectacular centerpiece of the movie.
It seems like all the best people are coming together to make this thing that ultimately was just a fun thing for me to do 30 years ago into this incredible production.
The opportunity to tell a story that was connected to something that was really deeply personal to me. It was just incredible.
You mess with my friend, you mess with me, mother!
Excuse me, who is this?
Colonel, this is Дэвис Окойи. And that there is Dr. Caldwell. She worked for Energene, and she did that was awesome. I forgot what I'm supposed to say.
That kind of guy.
Brett.
What?
Remember that private military firm we acquired last year? You called them Killers or Us?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, it's just your face.
Along with his I'm a convicted.
Sorry.
You know this ain't no truck stop, amigo. They don't just keep keys in the visor. Me.
That's right. We created the next chapter in me.
We need to get the retrofiers.
Wait. It fell.
Helicopters have been transporting victims to regional
To what?
Now, there it is.
This whole thing up.
Don't let my masculine and listen, all right, buddy, listen.
I can take it from anywhere. I just suck.
Me.
Now, come on. Come on. Don't do that. Don't put it up and down.
Totally up that line. I'm so sorry.
Me.
Russell, come on. Let's cut the bull. Russell, come on. Russell, can we cut the
Rookie.
out of here?
We've used our
Yeah. Get the hell out of here.
well used it.
Yes! I'm back, baby! I'm gonna be friends with Tom Brady again. I'm gonna get another helicopter. I'm gonna buy the Bulls. I'm gonna see Britney in Vegas. I'm gonna finally change my name to Brad. I'm gonna go see Britney in Vegas.
Ladies and gentlemen, the crew of Rampage.
'93, take one.
You know, this movie, it ended up awesome, but it was brutal to shoot. And I think that was a challenge for everyone.
Brad, Peyton, and I, when we come together, the action has been pretty intense and the action has been pretty big, but we're also trying to do things that push the envelope just a little bit more.
Brad directs the big types of movies that people want to go out and see, and definitely the types of movies that I grew up wanting to be a part of.
In this movie, there's a lot of action. When you set out to try and make things feel real, you have to put those actors in that situation. Making movies like Rampage is truly a dream. We get to create an idea, then you see that idea on the page, and then you see that page in previs, and then you see that previs start to come to life in front of you is just so magical and extraordinary.
Is this like a thing between you guys?
This is not a thing between us. We had practical sets everywhere we possibly could build them, which brought out the best performance in myself, Naomi, all the other actors. Just a fascinating process.
Brad is a full package filmmaker. Not only does he have the creative chops in the development process, but he preps a movie so well. He really worked hard to previs this entire thing.
Very few movies have ever done that, and really then lets the crew kind of understand Brad's vision. He just really understands all elements of filmmaking. He loves working with actors. At the same time, really understands visual effects.
Headed to the escape capsule.
Negative. Reroute to the lab and secure the canisters before departure.
We shot a space station with Marli Shelton, great actress. There's like a thing around her waist with wires that could allow her to rotate in all directions, which is great unless you lose control of it and then you're just spinning around like a gyroscope. And a set that didn't really exist. So that was awesome. And then every camera was on a crane, which is like an allergy of mine. I'd rather just shoot everything handheld. And we could do it in 3 days because that's how much time we had.
So weightlessness, believe it or not, is incredibly precise, complicated process involving pulleys and wires and about 10 amazing stunt men and women who use these pulleys.
After 3 days of shooting space, I was like, I need a vacation.
Rumble! Boom! Okay, and cut there, please.
There's no gravity, so up is down and left is right. You know, it's a complex thing to do.
I'm sort of like a marionette, essentially. And so it all creates this illusion of weightlessness, but it oddly requires a lot of body control to create that effortlessness. And then you add on top of that I'm being chased by a mutant rat in space.
I've always been incredibly excited about this movie. But the artwork helped sort of give me some insight into what's going to happen and what I'm ultimately going to see. I read the script, I thought, oh, this is great, and there's not too much action. This is wonderful, yes.
Pretty much anything that's got The Rock in it is you guarantee that it's going to be action-orientated.
Because I thought we were going to have to imagine the building shaking, but oh no, you know, they'd made it so that bits of the building were falling off, and yes, then I was strung up to the ceiling, flying around in a plane, doing all kinds of stunts, you know, it was, yeah.
It was so great that Brad had it kind of mocked up for me to see like the sequence, you know, because there's so much going on in that C-17 thing. And it has, you know, me and Duэйn and Naomi and the gorilla and the soldiers. It's amazing what you can do now with technology.
Outside of the set, we had up to 8 to 10 guys that were on ratchets and hand bombs to try and make all that work. We had a previs for it, but we kind of redesigned it a little bit. I think to make it work better probably for us and what we had to do.
And then cut to me, you know, hanging on a gimbal in a plane upside down, pissed, because Brad wants to do take 8. And I feel he's got it. He's like, one more. I'm like, okay, one more. You're an You get one more.
You're welcome!
What the hell is this? Mr. Okeyie and Dr. Caldwell. I am Agent Harvey Russell. It's the first time that these two characters meet. When we shot it, Duэйn, he's big. And I remember thinking, how do I do this and make it seem like these guys could go toe-to-toe and without, you know, The Rock just pounding my face into the ground, which, you know, he may be able to do.
Jeffrey Dean Morgan killed it. You know, he committed to the role, and you see him and Davis going face to face. It is just, we all kind of like looked at each other and we said, oh yeah, this is what we're talking about.
Okay, here we go for the
Duэйn
top.
immediately gets the giggles. Like, it's a funny little exchange that we have. I thought the best way for my character to get in his face was to do it with a smile.
Jeffrey Dean has that same swag and he has that same kind of machismo, but he does it with a wink, which is ultimately always more dangerous. I want to see George.
Brother, brother, I'm gonna prance myself right out on the limb and guess that no one's ever accused you of being a people person.
Again, it's a technique that I've used before, but it's incredibly disarming walking down this massive military jet with his swagger and his cowboy boots and going right up to, 2 inches from the Rock's face and kind of poking him a little bit, poking the bear. And what ends up happening with these characters is I think that rather quickly they end up having a very mutual respect.
I see you on board. Load him up with the 8.
When you're fleshing out a roster like we have on Rampage, you have to create the baddest asses that are going to go right now and start hunting down monsters.
I'm a big UFC fan, so I had Uriah Faber, who's a Hall of Famer there, I had Joe, who is now a really good friend, and this awesome tactical team, and they get to take on a giant mutated wolf.
Boss? Bert is the owner, leader, CEO of Black Hills Security. So it's like a Blackwater or mercenary group that was bought or swallowed up by this pharmaceutical company. And when things go wrong with the pharmaceutical company, they send me and my squad of guys in to find out what's going on or clean it up.
They're great cutaways because you go from Dwayne Johnson, the biggest movie star in the world, and then you get to cut to Burke and his team.
I was always a kid that loved monster movies. From the time I was a little kid, I remember watching all those old giant Japanese monster movies, and I always rooted for the monster.
Big action, all of which has kind of become second nature to me. So anytime I could strap on a big gun, fly helicopters, and go to work, I'm there.
Been in the entertainment world, but as a professional fighter for the last 14 years, 44 fights, just inducted into the Hall of Fame 4 months after retirement. So this is a nice, quick transition.
At this point, we're going to look forward. We're going to signal them forward.
We're working with my buddy Patrick Brown, who's also a former Army Ranger, and we got some real-life badasses, and I think that's going to translate to the screen.
Most of them would be prior military, special forces, Rangers, SEALs. They all come together for private companies. They'll come together, they'll train as a unit before they go out and any of this type of stuff. Normally it's capture or kill type missions.
When you're dealing with kind of a combat-related or military-related show like this, you want your stars, of course, to look professional, like they are that character. Open fire! And the cool thing about dealing with actors at a very high level is that actors tend to be good mimics. You can show them what they need to do, and they can copy things exactly.
There's definitely lots of training with the actors, how to move properly, communicate, all the different variations of movements that the military would use in an intense type situation. So doing one-on-one, hands-on training with weapons, making sure they grasp the concepts of how to move as a unit and individuals.
I came in prepared, I started training, I started knocking the rest off a long time before in preparation for Rampage. I went out and shot with Navy SEALs, members of the command in the Navy, and then just got here and I learned the choreography.
Joe's definitely easy to train. He's had weapon experience in the past. He's definitely a listener, and he takes everything you say seriously because he's 100% invested into the role, so it went pretty quickly.
Boss,
are we playing this?
Nice and easy.
What was cool with the forest is that that's exactly what we used with the trees and securing like truss and different rigs up into the trees. There wasn't a lot of doubling that went on. It was the actors doing the gags.
They're in a hurry. What do you think, Spook?
Joe was, he was in the rigs. He was on wires, and so was Matt. Brad really wanted to keep the audience fixed to the screen, but trying to keep it all within one shot. So again, that can be challenging, especially when you're dealing with wires and rigs and where we need to be and where we have to be to make it work.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Thank you, everybody.
For me, the emotion and the emotional experience that you get out of watching my movies is the most important thing.
Bo and our producers, what they're always concerned about and thinking about is the audience and what do they want and what do they need at every step of the way.
The intensity is at a 15 the whole time, and then you are on this ride and you do not get off.
That's what our job is, to try and create an urgency in the theaters, an experience that's brand new, and I really think we delivered.
have an opportunity to come in here and play this character surrounded by the real stars to me of this movie, George and Ralph and Lizzie.
I've shot this movie, and there's 3 characters that are just not in the movie. So you're watching these scenes, and there's just either nothing there, or there is like a person who's supposed to be a gorilla, with sticks for legs and all that stuff.
We're fortunate to work with Weta, and you put so much work into this character design and these creature designs that we want to be able to show it off.
Weta really brings this incredible storytelling element that they infuse into their creatures that makes them come alive and make them memorable.
For a monster movie or a movie that has a lot of monsters in it, it's really essential we not only nail the design, but that you also get the emotion through them. And that's a big challenge, and because it's part of the heart of the story.
We all have these filmmaker meetings with Weta. One of the goals was, well, let's do our best to try and raise the bar in the monster genre. And when you look around the room and everybody's nodding their heads, in that moment, well, this could be something very special.
The opportunity to sort of come up with archetypal creatures is a dream. Let's keep everything that we can keep grounded in reality real, but let's take the things that are fantastic and really enjoy them.
Of course, the wolf flies.
What Brad wanted to do is, even though it's 3 giant creatures, he didn't want to be a fantasy movie.
What is it?
I have no idea, but we're gonna find out.
I did do kind of a deep dive into, the background of the game, except there wasn't a lot of story. When I got the first draft and thought, it's cool that it's paying homage to the game, however, it's not scientifically advanced enough. I think when you set out to make a big movie, you need to really be looking at what hasn't been done and where you can go next. So we looked into genetic editing, genetic engineering. We stumbled upon CRISPR.
And CRISPR is genetic editing that's really happening today, and scientists are able to go in and rearrange genes in animals.
This is it.
Finding the CRISPR element of the story really opened up a lot of possibilities for how these animals could mutate.
First thing we did is we tried to understand what is the real technology.
Are you familiar with CRISPR?
Yeah, genetic engineering.
It's more like genetic editing.
In order to weaponize DNA, you have to start thinking, okay, what attributes would you want? You'd want strength, you want aggression. Myself and the art department, we kind of broke down, what are those attributes? What animals have those attributes? We had people from USC come in and talk to us about how DNA works and how CRISPR works.
And then we sort of came up with a strategy as how we would imbue each one of these creatures with the CRISPR technology.
Sharks are indeterminate growers, right? They never stop. Isolate that gene and combine it with, say, the growth rate of a blue whale, the strength of a rhinoceros beetle, the speed of a cheetah.
The peregrine falcon. Basically what happens is when it dives to get its prey, it has an extra set of eyelids that basically come over its eyes, so that basically as it's coming down at such a high speed, its eyes don't water. How can we integrate that into the wolf?
One of the things that the scientists said is that, this is unpredictable. So you're just going to get random kind of mutations. It's like, okay, this allows us to build real monsters as opposed to just giant animals.
Lizzie the crocodile gets gecko-like abilities so it can climb, has all kinds of rotating teeth inside her mouth, has a almost mace-like tail.
Lizzie is so big. The camera operators kept forgetting that, because we'd have a pole on set with a tennis ball for an eye line, but they don't realize it's 50 feet wide.
When you see the croc coming down the streets of Chicago, it's such a thug that you wanted its shoulders to be literally scratching the sides of buildings.
As the movie goes on and you see these mutations, you see creatures that have absorbed more of that pathogen are the ones that are affected the greatest.
For the wolf, we decided, because the wolf had a higher level of dosage, we got to have a little bit more fun with that. From the webbing between the legs, which gives it its kind of sort of flying squirrel gliding abilities, to a little bit of the porcupine-like quills.
Weta was so important to this process because there is nobody better to bring creatures to life.
You do all these paintings and this research and these details. It looks exactly like it did when we started. It's just evolved and gotten better.
Ultimately, as a filmmaker, you're just trying to surround yourself with people like that, and they're so essential for us because three of these creatures, three of these big aspects of our story don't exist without them.
The size and the epic nature of these monsters had to be not only incredible, but also really appealing to people in terms of, oh, those are mutated, gigantic monsters, but they look really cool, and I gotta go see them.
So I was trying to stay true to the game in the largest, boldest aspects, but then also kind of give it a little twist in order to make it a very original movie.
When we were starting to draw George, he wasn't an albino. There's a scene when he basically attacks a bear and he gets scratched. Quite frankly, it was really as simple as blood on brown or black fur is hard to see. And it was born out of that idea.
It's me. What happened? Did he hurt you?
George, we didn't want him, he was our hero monster. We didn't want him to become too gnarly and too scary because you still have to root him on.
You know, so we actually kept George deliberately closer to what he was.
We're kind of walking a razor's edge of he needs to be out of control and scary and huge, and he needs to be able to rampage, but we can't ever lose that connection between him and Davis.
No, it's not funny, and I wasn't crying, okay? There's a lot of debris around here.
Their fur work, this is serious, their fur work is amazing. Their texturing is amazing. Those are the things that make your CG characters come to life.
Our fur modelers are going through and they're coming up with the fur groom that is going to make George look like George, because otherwise he's just a little pink naked gorilla. You start thinking about all these conceptual things. What does that mean for the size of each one of his hairs? Are the hairs growing? Are they getting fatter, or do we wind up, and as you go into testing on this stuff, you go, whoa, wait a minute. If the hairs don't grow and George is now 35 feet tall, it looks like he's covered in angel hair almost. It doesn't look gorilla-like anymore.
So his animation style is a lot quicker, snappier, whilst still preserving his mass on screen and never having him move so fast that you don't believe that he's real.
Brad always wanted this to be a daylight movie.
Monster movies generally don't do that, but I thought they should, because it's not like monsters would hide during the day.
One of the big challenges having daytime photography of creatures is you see everything.
Every single keyframe is on show. It's a really challenging lighting condition, everything just being so harsh. As animators, it just made us more critical of our work and making sure that every single frame, there's no ticks, there's no pops.
A lot of times you feel like the monster's in the distance, you're watching it back on the green screen or way in the background, you're watching it at night. That's what helps them fix the foibles. But we really believe we can show through groundbreaking VFX monsters that have never been seen before and really go for it during the day.
And especially with George, who's an albino, that's a whole nother challenge, because now you have something that's a bright white gorilla that is also something that people aren't used to seeing every day. So trying to make that look believable in bright daylight is actually a pretty big challenge.
I thought San Andreas was big, and then I started making this movie and realized this movie is 10 times bigger.
The idea of these monsters are gigantic. The scale had to be enormous.
You do forget how large these creatures are, and even as we're setting up shots, when we're creating these eye lines and the pole just keeps going up, and you know, you're not used to seeing Dwayne Johnson go like this.
Oh, come on.
The big challenge for the animators on this is trying to keep in mind how big these creatures really are.
There's Lizzie. This thing comes out of the water, and you can't believe your eyes how big it is.
When you're seeing a 200-foot crocodile come bursting out of a building, shrouded in dust and falling bricks and debris, it's a pretty awesome sight to behold. The process is long, it's intensive, but the payoff is there when you see the final product. The first time you see an animator bring the character to life in a way that you weren't expecting is what I live for. That's the really exciting stuff.
That's the real achievement of Brad and the artistry of Rampage, making it feel like this is all happening. That takes hundreds and hundreds of people of our incredible crew. Great performance by Duэйn and great work by Weta and our VFX teams.
George, go! You know, we have a tagline, big meets bigger, and truly, this is big meets the biggest. And this will be the biggest probably you've ever seen on screen. There's a beacon set in Chicago by our bad guys, because they always set beacons. And the beacon is drawing these rampaging monsters to Chicago. Oh no. I can promise you that they're not going to Chicago to sit and chill and watch Netflix. They're going to Chicago to wreck shit.
It is super fun, and the audience are transported into downtown Chicago and watching Dwayne Johnson take on these three creatures.
Chicago was linked to the game. The lab was in Illinois. But the other thing that was more practical to the story was just where it sat inside of the U.S. in terms of the creatures and where they would converge to.
The trajectories have them both going in a straight line to the city.
Two different species making a coordinated long-distance journey that just doesn't happen.
I'd never been to Chicago before, so the first time I went there, I just kind of took in the city like a tourist, and I based what I did in the movie on that.
It's such a strong architectural city. So you want to hit those iconic moments. People that are from the city recognize, people that visit the city want to go and see.
We had some initial conversations about how the production was actually going to shoot the action sequence at the end. Obviously, we're not going to destroy Chicago, and there were going to be three aspects that we had to pull together. One, shooting plates of these famous buildings. Then we're also going to shoot a lot of the action with Duane that had to be really rooted in the environment. They were building sets on the back lot that he could interact with. But then we have to do all the digital destruction in that environment, and the creatures have to be smashing through it and tying that all together.
Rampage, by its very nature, has required us to take on the most destruction that we've ever probably had to do in a single film before.
We've got the three monsters, we have Dwayne Johnson, and of course we have our big buildings that we're destroying, which is kind of our fifth star of the movie.
In order to bring this to screen, it basically required us to reconstruct the entirety of what we see in Chicago. First in an undestroyed state, because we actually have to show that destruction happening. So, of course, we had to collect reference. We had teams on the ground in Chicago collecting thousands and thousands and thousands of photographs.
Weta, they had our LiDAR, which gave them the real photographic elements of Chicago pre-destroyed.
It was critical to Brad to make sure that Chicago felt like you were there.
And in order to achieve that, we had to actually film there.
We knew that was going to be one of the hardest sequences in the movie to pull off, and we actually went to Chicago and shut down entire Michigan Avenue.
And we had to shut down the river going through Chicago. We had to shut down the bridges going over that river.
There was a huge military aspect to this. We had a massive unit there and boots on the ground there.
It was really important to get everything out of Chicago that we could. We brought on Fred North because he's the best in the business at the helicopter aerials.
You have a pilot who is not just willing, but very, very capable, and will do insane stuff. So I scouted Chicago and I was like, Fred, I want to start a helicopter between these two buildings. I want you to shoot forward, swing behind it.
Pretty much right at each other, doing about 40 miles an hour, almost T-bone in an intersection.
And then get a shot of that helicopter with the creatures down here and then the bridge where the military is shooting.
There was a lot of news footage coming out of Chicago on the days we were shooting because the helicopter was flying 30 feet above streets and flying through their buildings, and his footage is unparalleled.
And we got all the footage we needed out of Chicago, and then we built these big sets so that we could actually have Dwayne touch, run on, and interact with.
We built Federal Plaza on the back lot of our stages, third rail in Atlanta.
The challenge was creating this vast area and not building it all.
To build practical sets everywhere we possibly could build them and add a little bit of green screen just helped me as a performer. It was invaluable.
These sets are ridiculous. They're astounding. They're truly astounding. We're shooting on top of a built rooftop of a skyscraper.
The Willis Tower rooftop, it's a big part of the third act. They shoot it clean, and after the fact we built it, they started talking about they wanted the building to shake.
So when George is jumping up on the rooftop, ripping stuff apart, we're throwing real pieces of debris at the actors. The floor is shaking, all the scaffolding stuff is wiggling around. So we're giving the combination of big digital extensions, but the pieces they're on are alive.
That's the one, guys.
The creatures climb up it, do quite a bit of damage, and in the process, it becomes structurally unsound and comes down.
Willis Tower is the second largest building in the United States, in the top 20 of the largest buildings in the world. It's 110 stories, over 1,400 feet tall, and for simulations and effects, that's a lot of geometry. That's a lot of things in computer graphics to have to simulate and calculate.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God!
Literally riding them in helicopters like you're riding an avalanche.
Oh my God!
So that one single event unfolds over the course of a dozen shots or so. So there's quite a bit of work there just in terms of destroying it in a believable way for something that size.
Typically, a lot of the times if we do digital city work, you're building the facade. You see the windows, you see the outside walls, maybe you see some lights inside, but you don't really have to think about how the building was built. This is a little bit different. Knowing that this tower has to fall down in order to build these assets in the first place, we have to do a lot of historic research. What were the construction methods used? What does the steel structure look like underneath this building? So once the tower has come down, we are left with this war zone, just mounds and mounds of destroyed building material, rubble, steel beams, giant concrete slabs, office furniture, every manner and form of thing you can imagine.
We built little islands of debris, and we put Duэйn on these different islands depending on where he was. They were completely disconnected from one another, so if you went and saw the set, it would just look like piles of random dirt, but there'd be a helicopter on one and a part of a building on another.
What we did is we analyzed when the Willis Tower comes down. We looked at what buildings would it hit and tried to duplicate them as best we could so that when you see the rubble, you literally feel that building.
There's tons of rocks all over the place, there's stone, there's jutted edges, there's wires. It's a legitimate destruction site that we've created.
Because there is destruction and debris, twisted metal, concrete, it is everywhere. There's smoke machines, you're coughing legitimately. I mean, you're in it.
Bombs coming in. It might be too much. It's a different movie.
And you would shoot little pieces, then run to the next pile and shoot another piece and run to the next pile and shoot the stunt.
And we then give it to Weta, and then Weta just goes to town and does their magic.
This is where we get to have some fun. This is where we get to have the monsters rolling all over these piles of debris.
Oh, shit!
The creatures interact with the buildings, either using them to their advantage or throwing each other into them.
So a lot of iconic buildings, like the building that Lizzie jumps through and has her big moment in the final showdown sequence.
Every interaction that the creatures have with each other also has an impact on the environment. Every piece of busted concrete that has to move has to kick up dust, and that dust has to interact with the creature. There's a lot of very complicated interaction that has to happen in an environment like this, and every department has to bring their A game to bring this to fruition.
We evacuated the city. So when you evacuate the city as best you can, when the monsters get there, well, shit's on.
You're seeing and witnessing things that are just so extraordinary, and you're having a blast the entire time.
It looked fun on the page, it looked fun in the previews, but when you're actually in Chicago with real helicopters flying around doing very dangerous stuff and getting these amazing shots, it's like that was the sequence. I'm like, okay, this is just gonna be badass.
So it was a very complex system to build Chicago, shoot the real one, then destroy Chicago. And it ended up awesome.
I have a really close relationship with the city of Chicago. In essence, I started my wrestling career in Chicago, been there hundreds of times. So to see Chicago like this on the big screen was really spectacular.
George always had to have a human soul in it. We had an incredible actor, Jason Lyles. He trained for hundreds of hours with our movement coach, Terry Notary, and really transformed himself into becoming a real silverback gorilla.
It's okay. It's okay to be scared. Come on. Watching Jason Lyles becoming George was an unforgettable experience for me, but it was also very educating for me, and it really gave me a newfound respect for mocap performances. George! Stop! George!
Allow the body to marry into that look with the mind, okay?
I feel like we should really train someone to move like a gorilla and perform like a gorilla. I need to hire the best person in the world to train them.
Terry Notary is the best movement coach on the planet, hands down.
Terry came in and he talked to me about it, and I mean, Terry's like a total sweetheart, and I'm like, you can act like a gorilla? He did it for me. He performed as an ape, and he scared the shit out of me. But he was like 15 feet away, and then he ran up to me. Because it was intimidating, you know, that was his point. He was like, that's how animals are.
It's not this. It's this.
Terry Notary is the best on the planet. He's the best human alive that we know that can do this.
I've done 4 apes films, so I've done a lot of research with apes. I've gotten to work with apes personally. That was pretty much the foundation of how I started to figure out what it was that made people perform as an ape, really, truly. There you go. Let it live. Let it live. That's excellent. Boom, you're doing it. When I was brought onto this film, I was asked to work with Jason Lyles, who is playing George. He's playing a giant gorilla.
So then getting to work with Terry Notary was just like absolutely amazing, because at the time we were training, he was King Kong in theaters. So King Kong was teaching me how to be a gorilla. But I didn't know until I started training with Terry how much of it was the psychology and the psyche of being a gorilla.
Let your gut drive you. That's everything. What it boils down to is it's not playing an ape at all. It's actually just deepening yourself, and because apes, they're just really deep, really connected humans. That's really what they are. And it was all about just letting go of what makes us human, really. The ideas of all the social conditioning that we have and the way of speaking from the front body. We tend to want to explain things and telegraph things like I'm doing right now. Apes tend to be drawn back and in. They sit back in themselves and they root down and they really connect. There's a wisdom, there's an old soul in the ape world.
It really was getting down to the most core human you can be, just instinctive and present and grounded and kind of like an untrained mute human in a way, really.
So you start with a blank slate, create a neutral body, and then we can start building the foundation. Do they drive with their head? Do they drive with their heart? Do they drive with their gut? I want you to just live through the looks now. Look, just look.
Beyond just the physicality of being able to be on the arms and physically embody a gorilla, I have to also bring in the characteristics and the personality that George has, that no other gorilla has.
The commitment he put into becoming George and the emotion and even the sensitivity in his eyes that we'd have through these stages of George, it's mind-blowing.
What became incredibly startling was how good Jason was. Incredibly complex, nuanced, real.
Because if that didn't work, the movie doesn't work.
It always boils down to the subtleties, the flit of the eyes. You want to fall in love with George. You want to see the relationship between Davis and this beautiful creature, that they have this special synergy and this connection and this way of communicating. And it's through joking and it's through laughter and fun.
can't, come on. I should never have taught you that.
This is one of the arm extensions. They're designed by Terry Notary from all the Planet of the Apes movies, Hobbit, and stuff like that. But it's impossible really to be a gorilla on all fours without these. This gives you the anatomy of a gorilla in order to play one physically.
Receive the ground as you go. Receive. Articulate through the ground. Good. The first thing is to find a nice, beautiful neutral. And you want to have that soft connection. There's no hard grabbing. Basically, you get into quad walking, the trot, and then the quadruped. You just start to feel like you miss them when they're not on you.
The third morning on these arms, I was sore head to toe. It was physically exhausting, but it is a lot of fun. We practice everything. But the hardest thing was just sitting here on a chair and just getting to this place where you see stuff as a gorilla. You can't describe it in words. You just have to be like, oh, I felt it. I know what you mean.
When I was working with Jason, that's what we were really working on the first week.
It blew me away. It revolutionized how I create a character, how I play a character.
Hey, Mark.
Terry Notary's daughters were on set for a few days in that first scene when we're in the San Diego zoo enclosure. Sky and Willow. And they're just amazing. They've done this for years. They've done it longer than I have. And they're great. Every take, you're killing it. It's perfect.
I like watching the Weta Digital people turn you into an ape. That's the coolest part.
I like motion capture because it's cool that just many cameras, it can turn you into a goblin or a puppy dog, anything, whatever you create.
They were fantastic. I really hope I get to be gorillas with them again someday.
You know, they're Terry's kids, so they're gonna be amazing at being gorillas and apes and all that stuff.
Family.
It's been really great just seeing how Jason is starting to really imbue this character. It's really not him playing a character, it's Jason's inner George.
I know that he lived with gorillas and studied them for 2 months. You know, he's the Jane Goodall of actors.
He brought his performance to a whole other level, which helps you to bring yours to another level as well.
It's the most freeing, pure imagination, fun place that I've ever gotten to in my life, and it's all Terry Notary.
George.
I obviously couldn't do this role without Weta. Obviously, it would just be me and PJs.
They take the realism aspect and they pride themselves on giving you the truth.
They know how to bring creatures to life in a way that isn't just like doing dragons or monsters or other things. They actually make characters.
Very funny. We're all very impressed. Yes, yes. You and I laughing at your joke, okay? New guy, he no laugh.
I think there was no question that George had to be in performance capture. The emotion that we wanted to be able to pull from the audience and to be able to pull from Duэйn, it was essential to have someone that was as photoreal and that could kind of perform and give that, pull that emotion from him.
We're not just in a stage. We had to do motion capture and really pretty crazy outdoor environments.
It's really groundbreaking. The visual effects technology that's used in this movie has never been seen before.
With Jason, we used an approach of on-set performance capture where we basically, place motion capture cameras all around the actual live-action set. Jason, the performer in this case, is wearing a motion capture suit.
And so they stick these dots on me in very precise places. These infrared cameras, there's 25 or 30 around on every set we shoot that Weta sets up. They pick up all these dots that make a skeleton, and nothing else is picked up. They don't see anything else on those cameras. You can be standing right next to me and you're invisible. They take that skeleton of those dots and those movements and they copied it into the model of George. And so then anything I did, now George does the exact same.
George, no!
And they do that with the face as well. The face are very precisely put black dots of makeup.
And the performer wears a helmet with some cameras rigged to his face. And in this particular instance, we stepped it up by having 2 cameras so we could get a little bit of stereo depth in the tracking, which just gives you that little extra bit of fidelity. And that is particularly useful for things like lips and jaw thrust. Motion capture is only half the puzzle. The other half of the puzzle is our facial models team, taking our facial model, which we've been iterating on and developing, and then we take our facial track, and then we marry these two things together. And so all these little dots that are moving around on Jason's face start to drive all these muscles on our puppet's face.
That is where they take my performance, my emotions, and put them directly into George.
Good boy. No.
That gives Weta this incredible place to work from this wonderful performance from Jason, and then they can kind of put the layers and do their thing.
And you get quivering muscles that to the naked eye you could never actually tell is happening, but that's what brings the nuance and the face really to life.
When you see George and you know Jason, you're like, that's Jason. Colin and I recognize Jason inside of George. We'll see an animation pass and we're like, that's not Jason. And you could pick them out, like from a mile away, you could be like, oh, that's not our motion capture. It was like night and day.
The most successful way to do that is always to find features from the actor and sneak them into the character that they are playing. In the case of Jason, we looked at some of the features of his chin, around his eyes in particular.
And Jason's really energy comes through in George. His eyes, his mouth, his nose.
Everything that's really George, normal size, is 100% Jason. The performance, the faces, the breaths, everything is Jason.
So now I look at what they show me and I see myself. I can recognize myself. It's really weird.
What Jason is doing facially just made a huge amount of difference and impact into the relationship we were able to create with Duэйn and George.
The combination of Jason's performance, the magic of Weta, marriage of those two really created George to be what I think is a character that you've never seen before.
I just saw you open your eye. Son of a bitch!